I guess the core, Greg, I'll introduce you properly in a second, but the core idea, I guess, at the heart of this conversation is us looking to explore how the role of kind of sporting leadership is evolving inside football organisations, modern ones and maybe less modern too. And as clubs have become in places more structured and strategically driven, expectations and the skill sets needed of football leaders are also changing, arguably particularly from owners and boards. This conversation is we're just looking to examine how those like well-run, stronger clubs are organising leadership authority, how they're helping maintain some form of clarity in how they make decisions, which I think is arguably the most important thing, and how they ensure kind of alignment between the sporting performance and organisational direction. In terms of myself, Dave Sloan, I kind of founder of VPP. We have placed leaders in many different football organisations, so have a perspective, I guess, from the outside. And Greg, having worked in a number of countries in a number of roles, definitely has one more from the inside. So I guess, Greg, you can frame this around kind of your experience, but how would you say the role of sporting leadership has evolved in your experience in modern football organisations?
Yeah, listen, firstly, good morning, Dave, and good morning to everyone on the call. I think over the last 10 to 15 years, you've seen a shift away from clubs relying on one person as a guru who knows everything, a unicorn leader, mainly focused on transfers, to people who are working collaboratively to build a system and a team that can make good decisions and strengthen the organisation. I think if you look at the best run clubs in the world, if we focus firstly on England in terms of Brentford, Brighton, referring to their Champions League run this year, maybe Bodø/Glimt, Athletic Club in Spain, clubs aren't built around one person. They're built around a philosophy, an idea that's then driven from within. I think as a leader, you have to be prepared to ask questions. You have to build clarity. You have to build trust with your team. I think the most practical example I can give of the experience I've had over the last few years is in my first summer at Blackburn Rovers. We went in and the club was going through a period of new change, new departmental leaders in every department, new head coach, and a need to rebuild the squad in the transfer market. So I think during that process, my main key role in the first month was to ensure that we had absolute clarity on the way we wanted to play, because that defines everything. It defines what players you sign, it defines how you physically prepare them. So it was then a case of getting out of the way and allowing the experts to make the key decisions. And I think from that, our data expert was able to identify a central defender, Dom Hyam, to come in and fit the system. And our physical expert recognised Sam Schmodic was the attacking player to bring in. But I think both of those players obviously went on to have great success on the field and also generated a huge transfer profit off the field. But it was giving them the time and the space to come up with those suggestions and then supporting them on it. So to loop back to the original question, I don't think it's about one person, be that a head coach or a sporting director or a CEO, having all the answers, but it's about building a system and a collaboration.
And it sounds like there's maybe a paradox there. If you look at people, and imagine people who will be watching this will be potential or wanting to be sporting directors in the future, there's a paradox to me about somebody going in who's going to be given maybe some autonomy, but certainly they're going to want them to lead in maybe a traditional way, maybe not always in the most not well run, but they might not be that cohesive or strategic or aligned to begin with. So how would you see in your, not saying they weren't at Blackburn, by the way, but you going in, well, how do you see the role of the sporting director? Yes, it's not about one person, but that to me sounds like really good leadership of getting other people involved. So is that very much an explicit decision by you to go, I've got to pull these people together? How would you recommend, the question would be, how would you recommend somebody going into an organisation that maybe isn't as aligned as they want to be to have the impact that they want?
Well, I think building that alignment from the beginning is at absolute core. That's something that has to happen from the outset. You have to get a shared philosophy in place and you have to build around that. But I think, look, football traditionally rewards confidence. It rewards someone who turns up with all of the answers. That doesn't matter if it's one person, if it's a company selling their product in that will solve all of your transfer. That's what football likes to reward, and it doesn't always reward uncertainty. So if you can show uncertainty and if you can demonstrate that this is the decision we're going to make, but this is the risk that's attached to that, and this is how we're going to assess that risk, you'll be in a good position. But I think if you go back to that framework, I think the first question to ask the ownership or the board, depending upon the group makeup, is what's your North Star? Where do you want to go? Secondly, what does success look like on and off the pitch over a medium and long-term perspective? Thirdly, the question that often gets left off is, what are we not prepared to compromise in order to get to that success? And I think once you've established those three, you're in a good position to then drive the alignment throughout the club. So I think if I think back to my time in Norway, in Bodø/Glimt, when I first joined Glimt at the end of 2017, their North Star was very, very clear. We want to make North Norwegians proud. They knew that. They understood the cultural reasons why that was important as a social reason. But nobody had ever asked the question, what does make North Norwegians proud? So, so as an outsider, I did that piece of work, and we led lots of different, I use the word focus groups to make it grander than what it actually was, but conversations. And we established 3 or 4 kind of key themes that kept running throughout every conversation. And then we said, right, what does that look like in real life? How does that affect our playing style? How does that affect our decision making? How does that affect our recruitment of both staff and players into the building? And what we then evolved into was a very front-footed, offensive mindset, both in terms of how we made decisions and how we played football. And I think it was encapsulated really, really well. Early in 2019, we played a game away at Mjøndalen in the Eliteserien in Norway. And despite having 10 men, came from behind to win the game 5-4 in the last minute. Håkon Evjen scoring an unbelievable goal in the last minute to win the game. And the day after, I had a message from our goalkeeper, Brazilian goalkeeper, Ricardo, saying, is that what bravery and resilience looks like? And I was like, okay, this is now a shared language. It's a shared understanding. We have alignment of where we want to try and go with this.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll come back to kind of the detail of that, but would you say that expectation, do you get a sense that owners and boards their expectation towards this role has changed or evolved at all? Or how has it, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it links back to that first point, because I think owners, stroke boards now, they want accountability with evidence, firstly. And secondly, they want honesty about what uncertainty looks like. What's the risk with this decision we're going to make? And I think all you can do as a leader in those times is share, this is what we believe, this is why, and this is the signs we're going to look for if it's going to go off course, to try and make sure that we can come back in and minimize the risk that's associated with that. So I think once you can do those things, then you're in a good position as a leader.
And it sounds like what you just described there. I guess maybe there's some different levers that you can pull on what's important for a club, for its identity, or maybe for the region that it's in. Because what it sounds like you did in Norway is actually directly link it to the area that they were in. How would you kind of advise maybe people who are going into this space to what are the levers that you can pull in terms of the questions that you ask of what's important?
Yeah, I think it comes back to establishing what that North Star is. And a lot of owners have bought a football club and a board run football clubs traditionally without knowing what that ultimate aim is and having people aligned to that vision. Because unless you've got that established and it runs through, it controls everything within your club. But I think also it's the thing that, unless it's embedded, it's the one thing that buckles very, very quickly under pressure. Under one or two results, it buckles. So again, if I think about Blackburn Rovers, we try to build a shared way of understanding how we assessed performance within the club. And in that first season, 22-23, we'd done well. We were sitting consistently in the top 6 coming out of the Christmas period. And then we went to Rotherham away, who were sitting in the relegation places. We lost the game 4-0.
Okay.
So the headline, not great. But I think, look, firstly, football is a very, very random sport. Secondly, there were some individual errors that led to certainly the first 2 goals. And when you looked at the underlying metrics beneath the performance, they were okay, not brilliant. Physically, the team had worked really, really hard. And yet, on the way home from the game, the call came in from above to say the players have to come in and train on their day off because of the result.
Right.
So without reacting, I acknowledged, and then it was catch up with the head coach, make sure he and I align that that isn't the way of resolving this, and then very quickly with the board the next day to say, let's go back to what we've talked about, how we assess performance. Let's not break this over one result. And it was an uncomfortable conversation, but it was a necessary one. And I think on the back of that, we then gone on a 12-game unbeaten run.
Amazing.
Now, that doesn't mean that conversation had to be had just to make us look right or reflect on that to look right. But it's about sharing that. When you're trying to embed up philosophy throughout the club, you have to protect it in moments of pressure, because that's always where it buckles, especially in football, where there's always that trapdoor of jeopardy of dropping out of the playoffs or falling closer to relegation or missing out on promotion.
And I think from what you said there, Greg, there's probably two things that we would see is true of any successful leadership group within. Actually, we've seen this in a number of different sports. The first bit is about it's a common language of success, but also not just a language, it's a definition of that language. And I think that's a really important point, because just because people are using the same words doesn't mean that they interpret them in the same way. So we've done a lot of work around with some teams that we work with, yes, on the recruitment of bringing people in, of kind of what you mean by leadership or what you mean by culture and those sorts of things. But then actually, what does that look like? What are their KPIs, and how do you actually translate that to, as you just said, what does it look like? And so people can describe what it looks like. They might not be able to, most people can describe what a nice car looks like. They can't describe how it runs. And so they might not be able to describe how you put the performance together, but they can describe what it looks like. So it's really important, I think, to do that work, and often out of pressure time. Sorry, can you still see me?
Yeah, we got
you. Cool. And the second way is, what was the second? What was the bit I was talking about? Sorry, throwing somebody on me. Is how you act under pressure, and so actually doing the work up front. Often, like doing pre-mortems of like when it happens, not if. Like, because you're going to go at some point have a blip. Every team will. How are we going to kind of cope with that? And it sounds like even if teams who don't, I mean, not everybody does that, but just having a mechanism, and it sounds like you absolutely ran at that fire, and you're able to have that conversation and to do it. Have you ever done any kind of pre-mortem work in that way before?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially around transfers, that's really, really key, because ultimately they're usually the big spend decisions with a club. Yeah. So it's trying to predict, firstly, what does success look like for this transfer? What are you signing them for? Is it a starting player? Is it a player who you're investing in to hopefully make a long-term return? What's their expected number of minutes to play? What's their expected availability during the length of their contract? Are we expected to renew the contract? And if so, at what stage? And it's also getting the buy-in from people around the room to say, this is what I feel that with my knowledge base, the certainty of this transfer will be in terms of the success or failure. And then also recording that and doing that, not to try and catch people out or to trip people up, but to try and improve your decision making and try and improve your learning within an organization. I think those things are absolutely key. And then if you can reflect on that honestly, and also communicate really clearly within your team that with any decision there is uncertainty, recognize that is and embrace that, because then I think you'll become a lot more confident in making those decisions and you'll get more right than wrong.
And how have you managed the challenge of the reality that there is luck involved? A kind of, I imagine you may have worked with some owners or leaders who probably want more certainty that you can get. The fact is, people watch sport because it is at times random, and the underdog can win. So how have you managed, how have you managed that maybe difference around wanting certainty when at times that you can't have it?
Yeah, I think, again, it's coming back to understanding what performance looks like for your club, for the organisation or for the team that you're leading, and making sure that you're always going back to that, even when difficult times occur. And if you can involve people in building that framework from the outset, then all of a sudden, then they build trust in it and they understand why you're doing that, because if you've got that trust and you've got that belief, when the pressure
Yeah.
comes, it always comes in elite sport. It always comes
Yeah.
out. That's the only inevitable thing. Then most times it will hold, especially if that's if it's been supported and driven from above, so they understand that the leadership within the club are fully behind it. Then usually it will withstand that pressure and not buckle.
And what's your view, and how have you seen? You mentioned from above there, where kind of the authority over football decisions kind of should sit inside a well-run club.
Yeah, I think look, it's a really really interesting question. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it. I think what's the least important thing is where the authority actually sits. The most important thing is, does everyone understand what the decision making process is, and ultimately who makes the sign off on that. I've worked and seen clubs where everything goes through one person. That looks quite dysfunctional, but it works because everybody knows that and understands that and works within that framework. And I've also worked and seen organizations where everything's perfectly laid out on an amazing organizational diagram. But ultimately, nobody understands what the final decision-making process is. So I think it's about tackling it early and saying, these are the decisions I'll make. These are the decisions you'll make. These are the decisions we'll make together. And finally, these are the decisions that neither of us can make. And we ultimately have to hand that over to the board or to the owner to make. And I think if you have those conversations really early and really honestly as well, then I think you're in a good place to go forwards.
Yeah, and you know what I think? Ultimately, the role of leadership, in our view, if you had to boil it down to, there's probably kind of technical skills and human skills that you have, but I think the thing that I see the best people doing is it's how they make decisions, and as in there's a framework for how you can't keep everybody happy. You just can't. But as long as there's a framework around how you do it, that's what's really important. I remember the one phrase that kind of always gets me a little bit is when, and we've been involved in kind of head coach hires at times where, there'll be a decision on who you're going to go with, and then you'll be in a boardroom and somebody from the board will go, well, let's just see if this is a good decision in a few months' time. And I'm a bit like, that's not really how decision making works. Like, is it a good decision now? And is there a rationale for how you make these decisions as opposed to post-rationalizing success or failure? Do you have any thoughts on a bit more around decision making? Because I think it's really the key to it, and how you get better at that process.
Yeah, I think, look, you have to understand that there'll always be a conflict, and recognizing that conflict sits there from the beginning between leadership and expertise. Because as someone who's worked in football now for a couple of decades, there are decisions that I want to be involved in. There's conversations I want to have. It doesn't matter whether it's about recruitment or development or tactics. But also as a leader, you have to recognize that if everything goes through you, you just become the bottleneck. And more importantly than that, people then begin to question whether you support their decision making, whether you're giving them autonomy, or whether you're just going to come back afterwards and call them out on it. So I think it's about asking questions. It's about being curious. It's about accepting that you don't have the answer and you want their information. I think my biggest learning on that was probably in Norway again, during COVID or at the beginning of COVID. And at that time, obviously, there's enormous uncertainty, not just around football, but around the whole world. And during that period, the board correctly wanted to furlough the majority of staff at the club and maybe just protect the first team. And we felt that maybe from a values point of view and from a psychological point of view, that wasn't the correct thing to do at that time. So I met with the player leadership group and a couple of other key leaders within the club, and we went to present to the board and put together a proposal that said, as a group, let's take a 20% pay cut for 3 months. And if we achieve our sporting goals in that period, and if football has restarted, because there was no certainty it would do, then we'd get our money back double. It's a gamble both ways. Urian Berg, who's a legend of the club, kind of spoke up and talked about all of the tough times that both the club had been through previously and the tough times in the north of Norway previously, and spoke really passionately and held the room. And it then went into a very heavily Northern Norwegian dialect conversation. I was really struggling to hang on. But I remember really the board then got their heads together and the chairman stepped forward. And I remember really clearly how, or the first few words of what he said, "Bara I 3 månader," only for 3 months. And it didn't feel like triumph for that moment, but it just felt that we'd been heard. And all of a sudden there was a shared philosophy that we were all in this together. And the season did start. It started 2 months later. And we were the best prepared team in the league because we'd kept everybody together. And we won the league for the first time in the club's history that year in 2020. And I think that comes back to that shared philosophy, that shared belief, but also enormous credit to the board, because with the blinds of just making a business decision, the correct decision was to furlough. But they listened, they heard, and they backed their team.
Yeah. And if you look at that example, and you've given two really great examples of a situation there where you did something and there's been good outcomes off the back of it. You gave one at Blackburn with similar situation at Rotherham where Paul has already done something. They're single moments, but I imagine there's then things that you did off the back of that as a leader, and maybe as a leadership team, that's helped maintain whether it's momentum or clarity or alignment across the club. Is there anything else that you did after that that was maybe different or that helped maintain that momentum which you seem to get in those two moments?
Yeah, I think the key thing with any of those words that we've talked about, philosophy, alignment, values, is that they can't just be empty words that sit on a wall and you talk about them at the beginning and then never ever revisit them. So it's about being really purposeful about how you do that. It's about ensuring that if you've got a staff or player review process every month, 6 months, every year, that those key things are baked into that, and that philosophy is built around that completely. We worked with some brilliant people at both of those clubs. Blackburn Rovers, Kath Bishop, came in and helped us build that into our review process. At Bodø/Glimt, it's much publicised about their work with the mental coach Bjørn Mansvak, the ex-fighter pilot. So both of those people really helped us translate some of those sometimes more abstract ideas into real behaviours and how you're going to catch those and how you're going to assess those, and also you're going to make sure that you protect them in tough times.
Yeah. Amazing. I guess one question, I know we've only got till 50 because we want 15 minutes of questions. I've got a couple to finish, but actually just thinking about the journey that you've been on, not wanting to age you, but you mentioned that you worked in for 20, 25 years, right? So as have I. So kind of, getting into our middle age, right? We've done the work up front. If you were to look back at yourself, say 20 years ago, or towards the start of your career, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? It's an exact science. You know exactly the way that the path that you took, which is obviously not true. But what advice, two questions, what advice would you give to yourself if you were starting again? And secondly, what might you do differently or additionally to what you did?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in terms of the advice is that you have to do the hard work in the unglamorous situations where you think that's never going to be recognized. So if I think about some of the days at Rushden and Diamonds going back many, many years, it doesn't even exist anymore, where the owner of Doc Martens, Max Griggs, had to withdraw his funding from the club, and we'd had successive relegations down from League One, where we'd got to, all the way back down to the conference, and the club was beginning to splinter and fall apart. And basically just trying to ensure that people stayed in their jobs, and protect those people's livelihoods. That was some tough times. And also going to Luton Town's my next move, where I joined them and they just missed out on the playoffs to get promoted to the Premier League. And then again, financial irregularities, 3 successive relegations. And you were firefighting constantly every single day. And those were tough times. And especially at Luton, as a Luton supporter, you'll get the double whammy of not only this responsibility, but this is something I'm really passionate about and love. So going through those tough times helps build the resilience, and also gives you the opportunity then to put into practice what you've learned when times are equally tough, but in different environments. I also think that the other big lesson is that all of the time you have to try and work on developing people, not just players, people around you, because good systems don't run efficiently unless they've got really good people backing them, driving them, working on them every single day.
Yeah.
So ensuring that you've built or create time every single day to build people, because people on my journey have certainly given me the time and the space to make wrong decisions, to recognize me and to help coach me on the learnings from those.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's brilliant. That's great insight. And I think we, obviously in the recruitment parts of our business, we always interview people, and people like almost like they want to go, oh, he's at Man City, he must be good, or she's at Arsenal, she must be. Whereas actually we're often, giving away a trade secret here, much more interested in what it was like growing up and how you got into the game and where your passion is, because actually that motivation or drive is the thing that is often the most important. Of course, there are technical expertise which are important in some of these roles, but understanding what motivates people, because when it gets hard and when the pressure comes on, and it will, how are you going to act then? And we found it's a pretty good indicator of the passion that you had at the beginning and where you did that. And obviously we've spoken in the past about different role. Well, obviously we're involved in the Blackburn one. And it's kind of like you could see from you, not wanting to embarrass you, but you could see that you'd done the work and that you were going to have that drive. And so I think it's similar from a coaching perspective. If you know somebody has like, when you hit, I always know, it fills me with confidence when somebody says, obviously when I first coached, I was doing a job that I was given too early, or I was having to coach in my evenings because I loved it. I'm like, great. That's what you want to hear, because then okay, they're going to do it. They do love this, and I think whatever you do, you've got to have that drive predominantly to actually do it.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, kind of from that point of view, it'll probably be the last minute or so before we get questions. What capabilities is there anything different that the football leaders of the future are going to need beyond their technical expertise that maybe they haven't in the past?
Yeah, I think it's probably financial literacy beyond just a transfer budget. So to be able to think forward to 3 to 5 years and say, if budgets change up or down, these are the expected outcomes and these are the risks that are associated with those.
Cool.
It's about making decisions transparent and making them understood why you've made that decision and what the risks are associated to it. So those two first things are linked. So again, just thinking back to summer of 23, Blackburn Rovers, we had some really tough pressure from external pressure coming on the owners, which meant that we had to reduce the wage bill by about 20% and bring a load of money in through transfer fees. And that could be framed as just a simple trading exercise. But there was a lot more associated with it, because firstly, if we do that, be aware it's going to be a lot harder for us to challenge for the top 6 if we've got a bottom 6 wage for the Champions League. Secondly, we've got a coach in place who's really, really ambitious and has come to this club to try and win us promotion. And there's a high risk that we'll lose him if that's the process we're going to follow.
Yeah.
And thirdly, that we have a really high value potential asset in the building in terms of Adam Wharton, who, if he plays a full year with us, could take away all of these financial challenges that you've got and beyond, and allow the club to have a real rebuild.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you're trying to convince people that to make those decisions are wrong, because sometimes the owners or board have to make those decisions. But it's just to make sure that you really explain what the risks are associated with those if they happen at that stage.
Got it.
So I think for people coming into this, it's to have an understanding of that risk management and be able to explain that in really straightforward language.
Brilliant. Great. That's a great example of kind of a real one, which hopefully people have enjoyed listening to. Amit, I'm conscious of time. I know you said kind of it's 30 minutes, then 50 minutes of questions. So we're just over the half hour. So I thought we were happy to chat for hours, obviously. We'll probably stop. I'm over to you. Are there some more questions that are kind of coming in, or?
So guys, please put your questions on the Q&A section. There is one question actually for Greg. Greg, as you move from a club like Bodo, which has a highly defined sense of identity, to a club like Chicago, which is incredibly diversity and scout, how do you adjust the leadership style to meet the needs of the club?
Well, firstly, I think MLS is a very, very different beast to European leagues, because the jeopardy of relegation doesn't exist. A majority of the teams in each division get into the playoffs. and therefore you have time to build things over a slightly longer process. I think the way that we've tried to do it at Chicago Fire is we've got a senior leadership team with expertise across many, many domains. And it's a really, really healthy decision-making environment because we can challenge each other, we can support each other, and it usually allows us to be more robust in that decision-making process. Now, I'm not sure you would get the time to do that in a European league, or certainly not as much time to do that in a European league. But what I've learned from the Chicago experience in the brief time I've been here is that's a really, really healthy working environment and a really healthy decision-making environment as well.
Cool. Do you think, is there any advantage, Greg, to having the jeopardy from a performance perspective? Do you think it can lend itself to not complacency as such, but is that edge helpful?
I think it depends. You could frame it that it's helpful, and I'm sure with some organizations it is. But if you've designed your environment to be a challenging environment where expectations are really, really high and you're pushing, then if you're one of those clubs at the top end of the league, I don't see the jeopardy really affecting that.
Yeah.
But American sport accepts that clubs can go through a 3 to 5 year rebuild, especially in the other major American sports, and they sit comfortably with that. And that's fine. So you just have to get your head around that that's very, very different to European sport. It's not right or wrong. It's just different.
Yeah. I can now access my Q&A thing. So I don't know if you can see this, but you've got a couple more questions. I'll just fire them at you, Greg. They're both for you, thankfully. Greg, what have been your key takeaways from working in different countries? What have been your biggest challenges? That's from Sam.
Hi, Sam. I think the key takeaways are that, especially on the development front, and that doesn't matter whether it's about staff development or player development, there are several things that run true regardless of the context that you're working in, and Dave's already alluded to many of those, that if you start with character and you drill into what the values are that your organization is built upon, what are the red lines that you refuse to cross, and if you recruit according to that, then you'll have more success than failure. And I think those run true to any environment that you're working in. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
Let me have a quick look at would you say, are there any differences for you that are kind of really, I'd love to know the differences culturally between Norway and the UK, because I get the sense, Norway, I think, finished top of the Winter Olympics kind of medal table, which is an unbelievable achievement for a country of that size when you've got kind of America there and different countries. So there's obviously maybe something from a developmental point of view, maybe some best practice that you could bring or try and bring to whatever country you're in, or is it something that's unique to there? We know that when we sometimes move people, really good people from an environment, they go somewhere else and they don't necessarily always be that successful. You've got to recognise the environment in their success too. So is there anything that specifically for me, for Norway to the UK, Norway seems a great place to develop in general. Is there anything you'd like to bring wherever you go from, say, there?
I think the biggest difference between the UK and the Norwegian working environments is the hierarchical structures. The UK is still very hierarchical, class-based, expecting one person at the top to have all of the answers. It doesn't matter whether that's a prime minister or a football manager. Whereas Norway is a lot flatter management hierarchy, a lot more collaborative management style. That doesn't mean you can't work in those environments in the UK. Many clubs and organisations do, but you're having to build that and you're having to revisit it constantly because it doesn't often come naturally. Whereas in Norway, that's just the way people work.
Yeah.
I think the Winter Olympics is an incredible story, but there is a caveat to that because I think the men's team in Norway did brilliantly.
Yes.
The women's team less so.
Okay.
And therefore, if it was just purely because of the environment or some secret way of dealing with snow, then everybody would have done well equally. So there are some absolutely outstanding performances. If you look at the skier who won 6 medals, etc., who really drove that process, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but I'm not sure there's a kind of a silver bullet that resolves all of that.
Yeah, fair enough. I understand. So next question, there's a few coming in. from Michael, having worked at Bodo Glimt and Blackburn, you've seen both high innovation and high tradition models. Now at Chicago Fire, what's the biggest cultural shock you've faced in your leadership style?
It's a positive shock, but coming into an environment where there isn't a legacy or history hanging over you and an American way of thinking that you can do this, anything is achievable through hard work and belief, and prepared to say, let's go, let's take this on board and let's go and do this.
Yeah.
And I think our owners are a brilliant example of that.
Yeah.
For decades now, Chicago sports teams have been trying to rebuild their stadiums downtown in Chicago and have been heavily reliant on local funding or refusing to put the money in to do this. And he's taken it a completely different approach and has now spades are in the ground through private equity, through his own funding. And we opened a new stadium in January 28, whereas other clubs have laboured over this on the same plot of land for decades. So it's just a belief and an understanding that you can get things done. That's probably the biggest difference I've noticed so far.
And I having been involved in like helping build the San Diego franchise in San Diego, obviously that belief and confidence and optimism that it is possible is infectious. And I think coming from a British perspective, I know not everybody on this will be British, but the different, like, we're just a bit cynical or skeptical maybe, but they make it happen. They absolutely make it happen, and it is an amazing thing to see kind of in action. Next one is, I'm just conscious we've got like 5 minutes, so there's a couple more coming through. Cabello, I think it's said it right. How do you see football leaders tapping into other markets using player transfers? For example, Chicago Fire signing a player from South Africa.
I think it's about understanding where you want to be focused on as a club and making sure that you're concentrated on those specific areas. So at Glimt, we were very, very focused on the Scandinavian market, especially Norway. And I think if you look now in their Champions League run, 9 Norwegian starting games, 1 Dane and a Russian in goal who's in the process of becoming Norwegian. So very, very focused on that recruitment. At Chicago, we've also become specialised in the markets that we try and work in. And sometimes you just get a tip off or a piece of information from outside those markets that you then run through your processes. So that doesn't matter whether that's we signed a midfielder from Portugal, Portuguese second division called JW. We signed Mbakazi and Puso from South Africa. And with Mbakazi especially, it was a piece of information that went into our head coach, director of football, Greg Berhalter, about this player we should be aware of. You then do the due process and think, actually, this is a player who has a really, really high ceiling. You then do the values work to make sure he's going to be a good fit. And once that's all aligned, then you can crack on.
Yeah, fantastic. So, right, let's next one is from Charlie. Greg, you spoke about bravery and resilience earlier. What other mental attributes do you think are the biggest areas for the next generation of players to develop within themselves to help form mentally diverse teams? Good question.
Yeah, look, I think the latest generation of players, and not just players, but young people, it's the ownership of their own journey. Really high expectations to get success quickly, and they want to be part of that. They don't want to be told how to go on that journey. So it's less about the players; it's more about how you're going to lead those players on that journey and understand that they have to have ownership of that, and that's whether that's via ownership of their own identity and their own image rights, but also it's about their involvement in decision-making processes, both on their whole career, but also on the team as well.
Okay, fantastic. Conscious of time, I think there's still 3 more to go here. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Yeah. So there's a question from Pierre. Even though we hear more and more about horizontal leadership, it's still difficult to see it in football clubs who traditionally present strong hierarchy and vertical leadership. What's your approach on this collective leadership standpoint?
It goes back to some of the topics we've already talked about. It is specific to the context you work in. Some environments, it's easy to embed that straight away. But equally, if it's something you really believe in, you have to ensure that you've got the buy-in from those above, the owners or the board, and then you have to embed that throughout your whole organisation. But if you haven't got the backing of the board or the owners on that, then it's going to be very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah, got it. Good stuff. I think there's 2 more to go. This is perfect time because we've got 2 minutes. From Aidan. What challenges do you anticipate facing as a leader on both sporting and financial side as MLS transitions its calendar to align with the traditional full spring that most European leagues follow?
I think it's a huge step forward for the league to do this. I think it brings us in line with the rest of the world. I think it helps enormously with the 2 transfer windows with squad building, because you're not feeling facing pressure in the middle of your season to sell. That's then aligned when the big transfers, and also on incoming transfers as well. I think the challenge will be the winter months and getting crowds to games, because soccer, football is traditionally a summer sport in the US. But look, I've seen when Chicago Bears were playing the playoffs in January and it was minus 20 degrees, you couldn't get a ticket for love nor money. So if the product's right and you can drive the right environment, people will come.
Yeah, they haven't been there for a while, to be fair, have they?
Years.
Last question, last minute as well. So kind of from Saeed. When working in organizations where decision making goes through one person, as a member within the organization, how do you bring on change and aspire new leadership approach without boiling the water?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, I think it comes back to if you're trying to drive that from underneath, where there's not a common buy-in above you, and it doesn't matter what level you're working at. If there's not a common belief to try and do that, it's very, very hard. There has to be a shared organizational understanding that that's the framework that you want to create and that you want to work in. And if you've got that, although it takes a bit of time, it's a lot easier.
Okay, fantastic. Greg, that's fantastic. We're kind of bang on time. I know that kind of Armit runs a tight ship, so we've got to be on it. Thank you very much. Kind of really enjoyed that conversation. It's great to kind of see and hear kind of your thinking around how you do these things. So yeah, it's really, really impressive. So thanks for your time.